almost like the Flashpoint, where it starts, one of the key matrix lines that will help shatter this status centralized system.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for joining me. This is Flashpoint Radio. I am Jay-Z, your host, and it is Friday, June 15th, 2012, and I've already made changes to the new format. Fridays will become our economy, business, and finance show. So we will focus on international and domestic finance, business, the stock market, the economy, economic collapse, crisis, and everything that goes along with it. I definitely do not claim to be an expert on anything covered here on Flashpoint Radio, especially when it comes to the economy. I know a little bit, I understand a little bit, and I have a great sense of discernment. In the future, we will be recruiting the help of my friend Jonathan to assist us in our trek through this economic quagmire that is the New World Order's global system. Until that time, I will be solo, and let's get right to it. We're going to start domestically with our stock market, Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average. This comes to us from Fool.com, the Motley Fool. Why the Dows lost touch with reality again? Well, the Dow was up big yesterday and was up big again today, 115 points, almost 1% up. And Motley Fool asks why they've lost touch with reality. I really like that these are the questions that should be asked of our financial institutions and those that are making money trading and selling shares. If they weren't already, U.S. stock markets are officially in denial, it says. Yesterday, the Dow Jones Industrial Average rallied over 1%, despite negative news coming from both sides of the Atlantic. What kind of negative news would that be? Well, we have the Eurozone crisis, as we've already looked at here on Flashpoint Radio. But here in the United States, according to data released by the Federal Reserve, those wonderful people, U.S. industrial production fell unexpectedly in May by 0.1%. The Fed also revised April's gains downward. April's figures dropped from a gain of 1.1 down to 1%. Not monumental, but a downward trend certainly paints the U.S. recovery as increasingly weak. Consumer sentiment has also fallen sharply thus far in June. It's funny, if you read these numbers they release, watch 1 to 2 months later when they always revise them down. Their first reading of the markets, their first reading of the data was always wrong, and they have to revise it down. What are some other reasons that the stock market should not be doing good? Let's look at some headlines from Reuters. Corrected, U.S. foreclosures up for first time in 27 months. So the first time in 27 months, foreclosures are on the rise. That's a positive sign, right? A reason for the Dow and all of the institutional traders to make money. How about this from Yahoo Finance? Foreign holdings of U.S. debt hit record high. Foreign holdings of U.S. debt hit record high. China ups holding after 2 declines. Now, don't get me wrong. Remember, U.S. debt being held by foreign entities is dangerous, but our Federal Reserve holds more U.S. debt than anyone, which is even crazier because that's paying one credit card with the other credit card. And in your family, it doesn't work. And in the global and the domestic economy, it doesn't work. Also from Yahoo Finance, jobless claims on the rise. So look for the unemployment rate to go up. More people out of work. More people stopped looking for work. Yeah, they're lying to you when they say we came out of the recession. We never left the recession. We have been in a depression since 2008. CNBC.com gives us this good news, though. U.S. deficit more than doubles to $125 billion since last year. Another good sign. How about this from the Washington Post? Americans saw wealth plummet 40% from 2007 to 2010, the Federal Reserve says. Another wonderful sign. Bain Capital, Mitt Romney, George Soros, Berkshire Hathaway. How have your profits done? I bet they haven't dropped by 40%, but mainstream America, everyday Americans' wealth has, because they're invested in derivatives. From MarketWatch, the Wall Street Journal, U.S. stocks rally on central bank hopes. And this is the reason, despite all of that bad news we just went over, the markets, the institutional traders, the banks, the financial oligarchs are making money, and the stock market is on the rise. U.S. stocks on Friday climbed to their first back-to-back weekly gain in more than a month on optimism for action by global central banks to stabilize markets if needed after Greek elections. Yes, banks, institutional traders, Wall Street, they're all betting that central banking across the globe will pump and pump and pump. And well, that's all they have to do. They've run out of bullets. They have nothing else they can do but deflate the value of your currency and print more money and give bailouts. And we'll get into what these bailouts actually mean in just a second. But to explain one huge reason why all this has happened, one way our Congress, our government sold us out and put us down this road is Glass-Steagall. I'm going to let Ben Swan from Reality Check tell you about Glass-Steagall. And if you don't know who Ben Swan is, Facebook him, YouTube him. He's wonderful. Ben, take it away.
After all, while members of Congress will shake their fingers at banks for taking risks that put all of our money and our entire financial system at risk, it was Congress who gave them the keys to this car. It was 12 years ago when Congress repealed a law that had been in place since the Great Depression. In 1933, the Glass-Steagall bill was put in place to create a firewall between commercial banks, which take deposits and make loans, and investment banks, which underwrite securities. With the repeal of Glass-Steagall, commercial banks were now allowed to play a role as buyers and sellers of mortgage-backed securities, credit default swaps, and other explosive financial derivatives. Basically everything that's gone wrong in the financial system, which began to collapse in 2008. Congress knocked down that wall, gave the banks the ability to take the risk, and then becomes outraged when they prove themselves untrustworthy with opportunity that they shouldn't have been trusted with in the first place. The banks in Spain are being bailed out. The loan is coming from some Euro fund, and the people of Spain, the taxpayers, they're on the hook to guarantee that loan. What's happening in Spain is not just a European problem. It is the world banking problem. If Spanish banks do well, if JP Morgan does well, so do executives and so do shareholders. But if the Spanish banks fail, or if JP Morgan risks $2 billion or $20 billion and takes a huge loss, who's on the hook? We are, taxpayers, whether Spanish or American. Because at the end of the day, the system that lawmakers have allowed worldwide is one where we have privatized the profits, but we have socialized the losses. And that is Reality Check.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Our Congress repealed an act that protected banks from taking advantage of the markets. And so now institutional banks can now be lending banks and vice versa. And it just kind of muddied up the water. And then you get things like this from CNBC from a few weeks ago. We covered this. Time bomb, ? Banks pressured to buy government debt. Turns out central banks around the globe are pressuring banks to buy their sovereign debt because, well, they can't sell it because of the global economic crisis and the devaluing of the worth of a government or a sovereign bank. The best part about this, and I want you to read this article. It's a little bit convoluted, but CNBC does a good job of explaining it to anyone. It gets down to this, where the banks, though, are caught in a great repression trap from which they cannot escape. U.S. and European regulators are essentially forcing banks to buy up their own government's debt, a move that could end up making the debt crisis even worse. Institutions, both in the U.S. and abroad, have been busy buying up their national sovereign debt for years, he found. We knew this. Alex Jones knew this. Bob Chapman, Peter Schiff, everyone knew this. Ron Paul, everyone knew this. Everyone knew this. But you ask yourself, what is sovereign debt? That's your debt, right? That's the debt that they say you owe, right? Sovereign debt. This is what the banks are needing bailouts to get rid of. Sovereign debt, too big to fail. Well, CNBC has a click-through link to explain sovereign debt. And let's go to CNBC for the explanation. Sovereign debt is debt guaranteed by a particular government, often called external debt. Now, throughout all of the other reasoning behind this, this little line sticks out to me, and it should as well to you. It's important to note, sovereign debt is technically owed by a government, and not the citizens of the country issuing the sovereign bonds. It's not the national debt. But sovereign debt is what the central banking oligarchs are giving bailouts to pay off. That's what they're using our tax dollars to pay off. Sovereign debt. And how does it work? How does it work? Well, we know that Spain just got a bailout, and well, that didn't last very long. And you've got this from the Telegraph. Italy will not need bailout if it continues austerity, says Wolfgang Schäuble. Yes, if Italy continues to austere its people and take away what the people pay for, which I don't believe in socialized anything, but if people pay in, they should get something back. But as long as they cut services, they will be fine. They won't need a bailout. Well, what is a bailout? What is a bailout? Well, Telegraph says IMF urges Europe to help refinance Irish bank bailout. Ireland got a bailout a few years ago. And well, after the Spain bailout, they got upset because the terms were not quite as good. So they want a refinance. These bailouts, who are we bailing out? We're bailing out private institutions. And what are we doing? We're getting loans from central banks who get their money from sovereign nations, from us. They create money out of nowhere, out of thin air. So they're giving loans to pay off this too big to fail debt. Those loans are backed up by the citizens of said country. So, as we said, sovereign debt not owed by a citizen. Giving a bailout is one way of getting rid of that. Yes, getting rid of that. So instead of it not being owned by the citizen, when a bailout happens and a central bank lends you money, well, that loan is guaranteed by the tax revenue and the people of that country. So that in turn changes the rules, now doesn't it? That's how they're scamming you. We don't owe this money. But when our government decides to take bailouts, decides to take loans out from central banks, like the Federal Reserve, like the IMF, the ECB, that puts the debt on your shoulders. That's how it changes. That's how we get put into economic slavery, which is what we are fastly approaching. And it will not be China or Russia calling on our debt and making us slaves to them. It will be the bankers, our own Federal Reserve, the private banks that get their money and own the Federal Reserve, the private Federal Reserve that prints your money, the private Federal Reserve that prints your money. It's called the Federal Reserve to purposefully fool the American people. It is a scam and a lie. But the IMF urges Europe to help refinance Irish bank bailout. The IMF just wants to bail out everybody. And they know so much, don't they? From The Guardian, IMF chief Christine Lagarde warns world risks triple crisis. And let's look at this IMF. This is an economic forum. This is an international finance group. And this is what the triple crisis warning is. Falling incomes, environmental damage, and social unrest. Why? Is the International Monetary Fund, 2 out of 3 of her warnings are about environmental damage and social unrest, which aren't economic issues. They may come from economic issues, but they're not. And environmental damage, you see how global warming, climate change, Al Gore, they're connected to this. They're connected to this. Carbon taxes, it was done by Enron. Enron started carbon taxes, carbon exchanges. Yes, Enron, Al Gore, all environmentalism is fascism, and now they're joining forces with the finance capitals, the finance ministers, to enslave us. Enslave us. Wake up. Consider taking your money out of a bank and keeping it in cash, gold or silver. At least take your money out of large banks. Put them in local community credit unions, because the community credit unions are forced to lend money out. Bank of America, U.S. Bank, all of these other large banks, Wachovia, they don't have to do anything because they make their money off of your back with the help of the Federal Reserve, and they use your tax dollars to make free money. That's Economic Friday here on Flashpoint Radio. I hope I didn't confuse you too much. Have a good weekend. Jay-Z signing off saying God bless and keep your eyes to the sky.